They work across all the disciplines.
I really enjoy the mix of the dance and the text. It's that I can be given a voice as well, not just being a tool for the artist to create with.
Well, I just froze, and then I realised that widow that Andy had invited over at the factory that time, do you remember her? I think she was called Valerie. Well, she was the one pointing the gun in my face, and I just remember thinking that the gun looked really small.
The beauty of Earthfall is the live music. That's what I remember most as well.
They do so much in terms of introducing people to total theatre. So it's film, it's music, it's dance, it's song, it's a whole host of things. It's not just one particular skill.
It's very much about emotionality and physicality. It's about people telling stories and being present. I would say it's quite a long way from dance, actually.
I really noticed that they understood technology and they weren't using it for the sake of it. They were using it to tell their story better.
The dancers are moving in a particular way, and we have the freedom as musicians to write alongside that.
I kind of feel like they de-dance it. So I had to work quite a lot on not pointing my feet and being less sort of balletic.
It relates to the wider world. It speaks to a lot of audiences, and it takes the essence of things.
The risk is because we tell the truth. It means that we allow a vulnerability and a truth within the performance, which means you're bearing your soul, and that's risky. Although, as Jim says, our way of dealing with that is technical, so in that way we take some of the risk out of it, but it comes from the heart.
Why are you making theatre? What is inside you that needs to express this? So we're locating the humanity and the conflict within human behaviour, the bad behaviour of governmental systems or regimes, and locating hope as well as all the other negative aspects. So that continued, no matter how non-political some of our pieces have been, there's always been an element of that, even when we reduce it to personal politics, so interrelationships and relationships between people.
We see the world in fragments, we see stories in fragments, we see things as if we're passing in a car and looking out of the window when we stop at the traffic light, and we see an incident between 2 or 3 people, and we build up a story around it, and then the lights change and we drive off and the story is incomplete, but we've seen enough to understand something about what's going on between those 2 or 3 people in that interchange, and that's how we look at our work, really. And it's quite William Burroughs. We are quite influenced by the like of William Burroughs, who cuts and pastes, really, or did cut and paste within his process, threw things up in the air and see how they landed on the ground, and joined them together and experiment with different orders. And sometimes what we do things which we call rhyming. So we will go back to something, and so we will try and conclude something between certain people in the course of the performance, but not necessarily spell it out. We don't spell things out, we leave things open-ended.
I'm actually wondering whether we even made that decision or it just happened, that we weren't going to do a well-made story, beginning, middle and end, but we were going to make work that had narrative fragments so that it could take moments of real life and real experience and elements of story. A poem has got license to use words in a different way because they just sound great, or you're really telling the story in between the words. And I guess what we're doing with our fragmentary narratives that we work with is we let a story emerge between the words, between the moves, and the audience are the people who fill in those gaps. And they fill in the gaps with their own personal life experience. So everyone might come out of a show thinking it was about something different, but every single person's interpretation of what that piece of work was is correct.
one, we would all meet together as a group, and then Jim and Jess would sort of go over all of the research that they've been doing in the past year, 2 years, however long they'd been considering the concept, and they would talk to us for maybe an hour or two about what the research that they've been undergoing and show us images or poems and all of these different provocations so that we know the context of the work and potentially like a mood that they perhaps want to explore.
What I would name it is that they would create a situation, an experiment through improvisation with a set of instructions that we could respond to, and then from that there would be a building of vocabulary of material. But the play part of it was also really, they weren't giving material like the choreographers giving stuff for you to learn. So it was also, you were kind of digging your own creative process collaboratively with others at the same time. So that was an important part, that there was a need for you to contribute in that way.
I remember doing a lot of improvisation at the beginning, and we had Kai Thomas as rehearsal director because he was sort of conveying the Earthfall style to us, or the way of working. And we would it felt like we jammed for hours actually before we even started working on setting anything, and that felt really exciting.
It's really wonderful. You can walk into the space and you can say, I have this idea. I've just been walking here, and then this thing, and they go, okay, show us, and you go, and you do whatever, and then they go, interesting, okay, why, and how, and what's going on here, and then it could be used, it could not be used, but the thing is that I myself know that I can do that.
There's something in the process of when we were developing choreography and when we're improvising that they would get us to, you do something for quite a long time, quite a long improvisation, or they set the task and we do it, but then we do it again, and then we do it again, and then we keep doing it, and then they do it for longer until exhaustion, and then at that point they know that's the quality that they're looking for.
There was an exhaustion that maybe allowed the truth to come through the body. I think when the body's exhausted, you hit a reserve of yourself as a person, physically, emotionally, energetically, and in that reserve there's a certain honesty that lives.
Develop sort of a phrase or some movement will pinpoint where the main movement originates from, and then we'll explore that area and reduce and center the movement into something of a more condensed.
Part of their process quite early on has been to have a series of questions to ask us, and I think in the very first one I remember specifically in Gravitas that they interviewed us one by one privately with a set of questions that were very personal. It was about captivity and confinement, and have you ever been confined against your will?
Adler's Wounds, the material, was all devised among the company. The majority of the narrative came from my experiences of being a young boy. So that process was very exciting, to expose stories and material from my childhood. It was an interesting process in that I was just young and eager and full of energy and full of frustration, and it really was like someone had got hold of a bottle and shaken it and then taken the top off. And I imagine that the energy that came off of me at that time was as much a matter of just physically directing it and steering it in the direction that they wanted it to go. Basically, I was an explosion waiting to happen, and Jim and Jess controlled that explosion in a safe environment, is how I remember it, I think.
So that feels to me to be a very important part of the process. It's not that they come in with, we're going to do this, then we do that, we've got the building blocks, you do this, you shape that. The dancers, that's the other important thing, the musicians are there in the room too. It's live music in the performance, but they don't just come in and add the music. That's all developed too. So the musician may have the idea, and then that's worked in. It's not just the two artistic directors saying, we're going to do this, you play that, and it builds. And I think that gives it a sense of, maybe that's why it's got that quality that when you watch the performance, everybody's literally living those moments. They're not just acting something out they've been told or there's been a sort of notation. They're able to follow something that they really feel.
You know, first of all, having live music is just an incredible thing, period. It changes the space, it changes the relationship, because it's alive, you're alive. That's a, you know, it's not in a set time frame, you know, it has a breathe, it breathes.
When we would come up with the initial ideas, we would be in the same room, which is kind of nice in some ways, in that it means there's a sort of link between the movement and the music from the beginning.
The vibration in the auditorium is completely different than if it's recorded music. And that goes for the dancers themselves. I think the way that they hear the music, the way that they can feel the music, or if the music is live, the music can follow the movement much more than if it's recorded, it's set, you dance 5, 6, 7, 8, and that's the end of it.
And so sometimes there would have to be cues that were not necessarily what you would do in a musical timing, where you would hit something on a 4 or 8 bars or 16 bars. You tend to think in those patterns. You might be like 5.5, or when this thing happens, do that. And that was quite difficult to make it kind of sound fluid and as though you're not sort of, next bit, you know.
It's really interesting because you can be in your own world as a composer and write music for yourself, but when you have dancers moving in front of you who convey an emotion, you as a composer get to express that emotion through music, which is really wonderful.
So that energy is in the space, and also their emotions that they're going through with playing as we are with our movement. It's all affecting the space.
Recording the soundtrack of Stories from a Crowded Room in Frank's studio in Grangetown in Cardiff, with the two musicians who are new to Earthfall, Eric and Marie. They followed Frank and Sean, who'd worked with us for many years. And when Frank heard the soundtrack, he actually said, "It sounds like an Earthfall soundtrack." And it made those guys think, I wonder whether we were steered a bit more than we thought we were when we were composing this music. And I actually think that we steer more than we realise we do when we're proposing to people how they construct material, how they construct movements, how they construct musical phrases, because what we do is we put our stamp of methodology, the way that we work, on all our performers. So there is a kind of harmony about it and a continuity about our style.
I would say we provide a loose script which gives them the freedom to explore their own creativity. So I suppose that's what we do.
Yeah. It's informed by our taste. Unfortunately, we have the same taste. And that is one reason why we have successfully worked together.
Did you say
25 years?
Did you say "and fortunately" or "unfortunately"?
No, which is why, fortunately.
We laughed at her while I made tea and found some cookies. The people next door told us to keep the noise down. Fucking hypocrites.
It's an interesting question of how does technology add more emotion to a project? And for me in my work, I think it fundamentally doesn't. And I think as soon as you ask that question, you're asking the wrong question. Because does a pen add more emotion to a book? It doesn't. It's just a new form, another way of telling a story. And as soon as you start thinking like that, then you're kind of doing it wrong. And what I loved about working with Earthfall and Jim and Jess is that they understood that. They weren't looking for the quick hit. They weren't going, oh, technology, we've got to do this because it is a tick box. They were actually doing it because they wanted to tell stories in different ways. And I suppose the line I always kind of use is, don't make things digital, create digital things. And if you do that, then I think real magic can kind of happen.
We do have a shared tendency to want to reveal the processes by which those mediated elements are generated within the work itself. So if we're using live camera, those things are obvious. You will see people with cameras. So I think there's something about revealing the mechanisms within the material itself, which is part of the aesthetic, which I think is interesting.
What are the challenges about building something that has to tour? Yeah, it has to pack away. That's it. It's really as simple as that. You have to be sure that you have contingency if you start building it and it goes wrong. It's very easy to get something that you know will go up and down in a certain number of hours, and all the time it goes well, that's fine. Because when something goes badly, you have to trust yourself and the people around you. The challenge of Atsu and Two Boys was, as much as anything, trying to convince venues that it was safe and convince venues that it was possible. When you arrive in a venue or you send technical specifications to a venue, and number one on the list is, I will fill your stage with 1,000 litres of water. And the other thing that people get very nervous about, obviously, is electricity and water next to each other. Nobody likes that, so you have to be very careful about that. But there's a confidence trick in getting that sort of thing accepted. I was confident with that show. I knew that it looked good. I knew that what happened within that environment was beautiful. So the second, technicians would be difficult most of the day, and when the lights are on it and the water is lit and there's a kind of a mist that comes off the water because it's under pressure that fills the space, maybe 7 or 8 times out of 10, I would feel the technicians, physically relax, and they would look at it and they would understand why we'd gone through all of this.
It became, and I think that was the genius of that show and the choreography of it. The water wasn't just a bit of fancy set. It wasn't just to make it look a bit more impressive or a more interesting show to sell. The water kind of became an extension of the movement. They used to tell us not to just think about what it was that our body was doing in that slide or in that spin, but actually how the water would then travel beyond that. And Gerald set how the lights would then catch those droplets of water.
And it was cold, to be honest, a lot of the time, and that gave a particular kind of emotional quality or character. I think it brought out a vulnerability even more, actually, especially if you're half naked and with water. It's almost birth-like, It's quite. But it was a challenge. But it was also a great piece of theatre, actually. It was dance, but it was a piece of theatre for sure.
The piece tends to make sense of itself in a very gradual way, actually. I feel like you're in a creative process and then you go into performance, and I feel like it really grows during performance, because the added element that you're missing in that list is the audience and their effect on the whole experience, because it's definitely something that reaches out and kind of brings people in, I think.
So you create the movement, you create the text and the music, and then once you start piecing it together, you slowly find your journey through the show. And once you've found your journey, your physical journey through the show, then suddenly you start to find an emotional journey. And the emotional journey is a constant change through a tour.
We will keep on developing certain ideas, and some things are fresher, some things are more developed than others once it goes into a tour situation. So we keep an open mind about what we might add, and sometimes the additions or the changes are very, very subtle from the outside, but from inside they're quite definite, and they make a hell of a difference in terms of the dynamic.
trying to locate the bodies within a political situation. So what does the body do in the context of a demonstration in the street? How do bodies react to conflict and war? How do bodies react if they have to move from one country to another because of conflict, so such as refugeeism? What are bodies doing when they're inside a building planning an atrocity to destroy other buildings and other bodies? So we asked ourselves these questions. So when we made what we regard as a watershed piece for Earthfall, a piece called Eye and Eye, that was really the true story of a couple from different areas of Sarajevo and different religions who fell in love and who wanted to be together and run away together, whose article we read about in the Observer newspaper, where they tried to escape and were running through no man's land and were shot, and we located the footage of their two hands trying to touch one another before they died. And we thought that was the essence of what we termed choreography and politics, although the result of politics and the action of bodies. And that is something very, very beautiful and tragic within this absolutely atrocious war in former Yugoslavia. Before opening it in the UK in Cardiff, we premiered it in Ljubljana through the British Council, and the war was still in earshot, and it was a really profound experience for us, and we knew we were touching on something within our needs and ourselves, why we want to make this kind of work, what it means to us.
We got involved with one particular show with Amnesty International, who ended up touring beside us with a work that we made called Forever and Ever, which is also a personal story from one of our performers, a Brazilian performer, who had been demonstrating against a political regime in Brazil at that time, a military regime. We expressed her own story in the way of three characters, Margarita playing herself, her friend Anna, and a torturer. And we really looked closely at what does it mean to have the ability within a human being to torture another human being. So we're not just looking, what does it mean to be tortured, but we looked at what does it mean to be a torturer. And that was a very strange place to go. And we did a whole series of works that were really fundamentally to do with human rights. And it was a really hard place to go, wasn't it? We got very depressed.
Other people have been arrested. Anna. She was one of them. No one was allowed to visit. Even her mother could not visit her. She was just 17. I continued going to meetings, but my heart was broken. So many mothers, so many fathers whose children were lost. They were the disappeared ones. Os desaparecidos.
So working for such an interesting dance company anyway was quite enlightening, but being able to take that work out to a whole variety of different peoples, different ages and backgrounds, a lot of non-dancers actually we did education work with. So it was really interesting seeing how different groups would interpret the work, how they engaged with it. A lot of people who didn't think that they could engage with dance, really engaging with the work, being exceptionally creative more often than not, actually, and a place where they could share their own narratives as well.
Which were really powerful when you get a bunch of young people for a week. You actually get to see a transformation through the process. You get to see people's confidence build, change, and you get to see aspects of someone come out in a different way.
Young children, for example, sort of feeling that it was, they're a little bit shy, a little bit bashful, not really sure where their place in the world is. And then, Jess or the performers or Jim will come in and have a chat with them, and suddenly you see this sort of explosion of personality because someone's gone, you can do it. There's no question in my mind. Go off, be free, do it. And it's absolutely incredible. And the same, goes for the performers. But I think it's, without wanting to sound too grand, it goes far beyond Cardiff and Wales. Like, I've seen it across the UK, and I haven't been internationally with them, so I can't speak on that behalf. But really, wherever they've gone, they've had the same kind of impact. And it's that trace that helps people find steps in life, in my view.
I'm going to speak, maybe this is nostalgic, but fuck it. I'm kidding.
The idea of gentle steering, I've learnt from working with Earthfall.
They were all so willing to make us feel at home and go beyond what's necessary professionally. They know that they can't get the job done without the people that are around them, and so they see the value in treating those people with kindness and ensuring that everyone's happy so that together you can get the job done.
Yeah, and I always feel like they really value me as a person and as a performer, and that feels really wonderful. They're very appreciative of the people they work with, which is really lovely.
They make you feel welcomed and loved and able, competent. They empower you by giving you sort of autonomy. They just sort of go, I've got an idea, run with it, and I'm not very good at running with stuff. And they're there all the time giving you support.
And that you can use your life in your creative process, and that you use it, and you make something of it, like an alchemy. You turn something into gold by sharing it or by making something of it. And that's quite an honour, it's quite a gift to be able to have that opportunity.
Their professionalism, creativity and just humanness is really what makes them unique in my eyes, at least.
As the trees fell below, she said, light to her throne. The weight of her fate led her onwards with grace, with a heart made of